The day my boyfriend's first love was released from the hospital, he traveled many kilometers to visit her and held a modest wedding ceremony. He explained, "She won't be able to walk again. This is her only wish, and I couldn't deny her the chance to fulfill it." But what about me? What role am I supposed to play? In public, my current boyfriend openly shows deep affection for someone else. In private, my ex-boyfriend mocks me. "Francesca, I thought you'd be thriving after leaving me." Grayson, my former boyfriend, stands beside me at that very moment, his voice thick with sarcasm. "So, this is what it has come to." I was momentarily speechless, pressing my lips together without saying a word. I simply watched the two individuals at the center of the hospital lobby. Lucas was on one knee, placing a wedding ring on the bride seated in a wheelchair. At that instant, the room filled with applause. The atmosphere was lively as Lucas lifted her veil, revealing the star of his ceremony, Fernanda, his first love. The crowd began chanting, "Kiss, kiss, Fernanda," as she, unable to stand, raised her head and smiled at Lucas with eyes full of love, perhaps remembering me, her girlfriend of just over a month. Lucas hesitated briefly before finally kissing the side of her face. At that moment, he looked up and noticed me standing at the edge of the crowd, along with Grayson. Lucas was immediately taken aback. His expression flustered as he released Fernanda's hand and started to move towards me. "Fran, Fernanda swiftly grabbed his arm, tears welling in her eyes as she pleaded, "Lucas, you can't just abandon me like this." The guests, unaware of what was happening, turned their attention to me, frowning disapprovingly. "Who is this woman? What is she doing here? She's ruining a perfectly good wedding." I didn't respond, keeping my gaze fixed on Lucas. He shook off Fernanda's hand and took a few steps towards me in front of everyone. "Fran?" Lucas glanced at Grayson, his hand clenching into a fist. "Nanda had a car accident and might never walk again. She only wanted someone to help her experience being a bride." "Ha!" I hadn't finished speaking when Grayson chuckled. Lucas's expression darkened instantly, his arms tensing, veins popping as he looked at me with restrained emotion. "Fran, I'm sorry I messed up. Can you—" "Lucas," I interrupted him softly. "She just wanted someone to help, but why did that someone have to be you?" Lucas and I had known each other for nearly a year, meeting through mutual friends. I always believed he respected boundaries, but I never thought that just 1 month into our relationship, he would do something like this. Lucas seemed to understand my meaning. He instinctively stepped forward, trying to grab me, but as he lifted his leg, Grayson moved in front of him, blocking his path with his body. I stood motionless, looking up at the back of Grayson's head. His sudden movement brought us closer together, his presence enveloping me. For a moment, it felt like I was being drawn back to a time years ago. It was late, and I was walking back to campus alone, when 2 strangers with cigarettes blocked my path, demanding my contact information. I refused, but they wouldn't let me go. Just as they reached out to grab me, Grayson appeared, striding in front of me and blocking the 2 men. "Didn't you hear her say she's not interested?" Grayson had stood up for me like this many times before. I felt a bit dazed, as if I had returned to that moment. Lucas noticed first, hesitating, his fists clenching even tighter. "Fran," I cut him off, my tone indifferent. "Lucas, let's break up." Before the words fully left my mouth, Grayson turned to look at me. I didn't want to stay here under everyone's gaze, but he grabbed my wrist with a grip too strong, making me wince in pain. Grayson immediately released me, staring intently. "Shall we go?" All I wanted was to escape from this ridiculous and melodramatic situation. The evening was setting in, and the city lights were beginning to sparkle. Grayson silently followed behind me, maintaining a distance that was neither too close nor too far, but impossible to ignore. I called out to him, "Grayson," and the night breeze carried my voice away. "It's been a long time." At that moment, I truly felt the gravity of the situation, understanding the importance of this reunion. The footsteps behind me paused briefly before continuing. Each step echoed in my heart, both softly and loudly. Grayson chuckled, his tone indifferent. "You know it's been a long time since we last saw each other." Hearing that, I stopped and turned to face him. He stood a few meters away, his brows furrowed, the night's darkness enveloping him and making him seem unapproachable. I called his name, pulling a small smile. "It's been 6 years, and you still—" Sigh. Grayson didn't respond. He took a few steps closer, standing firmly before me with an undeniable presence. "Francesca." He raised his hand to touch my face, his thumb gently pressing the corner of my eye, staring at me intently. I squinted, trying to ignore the strange feeling in my heart, but he wasn't letting go easily. "You liked him that much. You couldn't let him go, so you had to attend his wedding to finally give up." I turned my face away, freeing myself from his grip. Of course, I liked him, and we were a good match. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been with him. "But you—" I looked him up and down, smiling slightly. "You wouldn't still be hung up on me, would you?" Upon hearing that, Grayson scoffed. "What makes you think I'd still like you, Francesca? Don't forget you were the one who asked for the breakup." Just as I expected. "I haven't forgotten." I shook my head, not wanting to argue further. "By the way, why were you at the hospital?" Grayson seemed taken aback by the sudden change in topic and instinctively replied, "My stomach was acting up." I clicked my tongue. "Grayson, you really are a spoiled brat." As soon as I said that, Grayson pressed his lips together, his expression darkening. It was clear he remembered why I broke up with him. "You're a privileged young man. Dating you felt like everyone around us had to warn me. Grayson, admit it. Your mom was right. We're not from the same world. Being together would only lead to exhaustion, and eventually you'd be heartbroken and I'd be sad." "Grayson, that's just how I am. There's a saying I like, if someone or something makes you sad, just stay far away from it." Grayson and I were classmates in college, and we were each other's first love. In our early 20s, we loved each other with intense passion. He came from a good family, was handsome, and capable. Such a person always attracted attention. Since college, many people pursued him, trying to get close, but Grayson firmly rejected them all. He never allowed anyone to get near him, providing me with a sense of security. He was the one who encouraged me, holding my hand and standing beside me. At that time, I was certain of his clear and unwavering love. But reality is harsh. It first offered me sweetness, only to strike me hard afterward, for the most cliched of reasons. Grayson's family arranged a fiancé for him. Initially, he was against it, arguing vehemently, even running away from home. It seemed like I was his entire world. Honestly, I felt burdened at that time. Then came his mother, his uncle, and others, along with that exceptional fiancé they always spoke about, but I never met. I became truly exhausted, suddenly realizing that Grayson and I were indeed from different worlds. Eventually, I was coerced by his mother, much like a melodramatic TV drama. If I didn't break up with him, it wouldn't just affect me, but also the people around me. It wasn't as dramatic as in the TV shows. No rainy breakups, no tears of misunderstanding, none of that. I simply told Grayson everything honestly and then said I was tired. Love is meant to bring happiness and joy, not to become a solitary battle against the world. Who can say how much more trouble it might cause, or if we would eventually grow to resent one another? Let's end it now, while everything is still beautiful. Elders often say that marriage should be between equals, and I used to agree with that. So, I ended things with Grayson. He looked at me in shock, insisting he wouldn't accept the breakup. I smiled and explained that ending a relationship doesn't require both parties to agree. Grayson pleaded repeatedly, asking me to wait a bit longer and promising to fix everything. But I left firmly. I remember his last words, his gaze cold and harsh. "Francesca, I'll make you regret this. I swear." At that moment, I was heartbroken and sad, and I thought he felt the same, maybe even more. However, time eventually heals all wounds. I never imagined we'd have a reunion like this. The sudden ring of my phone shattered the silence between us. I saw it was a call from Lucas. Grayson's expression darkened further as he mocked. "He still has the nerve to call you." Ignoring Grayson, I answered the call. Lucas's anxious voice was sharp and almost grating. "Fran, where did you go? Please listen to me. I didn't know she asked you to help her with this. I was just confused for a moment. That's why I agreed." "Lucas," I interrupted him, glancing at Grayson, who was growing increasingly displeased. I was clear when we decided to try this relationship. We couldn't betray each other. Even if it was just once, even if it was a moment of confusion, it's irreparable. Let's break up, Lucas. "Fran, I don't agree," he protested, but I smiled slightly and said, "Breaking up doesn't need mutual consent." With that, I hung up and blocked Lucas's number. Grayson remained like a sentinel, watching me the entire time. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "It's irreparable," he said. I didn't sense anything unusual, assuming he was referring to Lucas. When someone makes a mistake, they must face the consequences. Isn't that normal? Grayson fell silent. Only then did I notice something was wrong. I turned to look at him. His deep black eyes were fixed on me, intense and unwavering. His voice was cold. But I didn't make a mistake back then. It was some coward who decided to leave me. He claimed I was the one who let go, saying I was tired and no longer loved him. As he spoke, Grayson leaned closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "Francesca, tell me who was really at fault. Grayson must hate me." He was once the golden boy, but with me he humbled himself repeatedly. For someone like him, getting anything he wanted was easy. Yet with me, he struggled. Does it really matter? There was a brief silence before Grayson let out a soft laugh. He straightened up, but there was no humor in his eyes. "It's been 6 years. It's pointless to remain so serious about it now." Before he could say more, his phone rang. As soon as he saw the caller ID, the coldness around him faded, and his expression softened. He took a few steps away and answered the call. I could faintly hear a woman's voice on the other end. "Okay, wait for me there. I'll be right over." Grayson didn't talk long. He quickly hung up. For some reason, memories I thought were long forgotten resurfaced. Grayson loved filming. When we were together, he constantly recorded everything with his camera. Eating, sleeping, shopping, traveling. He tirelessly captured every moment we shared. He once proudly gave me the camera, saying that if I ever missed him, I could watch the videos. I stubbornly replied that day would never come. But after we broke up, I found myself watching those videos repeatedly. His expressions were once solely for me, but now he was avoiding my gaze, showing his gentleness to someone else. It struck me that no one stays in the same place forever. Not every reunion can mend what's broken, at least not for us. Perhaps the golden boy who had never been rejected still harbors resentment towards me, his first love who abandoned him. After that reunion, Grayson and I didn't see each other for a long time. Human connections can be deep or shallow, depending on how fate plays its hand. When I saw Grayson in the conference room that day, I thought, fate's mood today is hard to gauge. As soon as I took my seat, the conference room door was violently swung open. I looked up to see Lucas, whom I hadn't seen in a while. He didn't look well. His face was pale, his shirt wrinkled, his chin shadowed with stubble, and dark circles under his eyes showed he hadn't rested properly. Lucas stared at me, his eyes reflecting a light I couldn't quite understand. A sense of foreboding settled in my chest. I quickly motioned to my assistant, but it was too late. Lucas walked briskly toward me, his voice filled with sorrow. "Fran, what did I do wrong that you had to break up with me?" "We've known each other for over a year. Don't you know what kind of person I am? What happened that day was just a misunderstanding." Faced with Lucas's complete disregard for the situation, I suddenly realized I had no idea what kind of person he truly was. Lucas was introduced to me by my mother, who was getting older and worried about my approaching 30th birthday without a boyfriend. She wanted to ensure my marriage prospects, so I agreed to meet him. When I first met Lucas, he brought a bouquet of flowers. His shirt was meticulously buttoned, and he gave off a pleasant, warm impression. But years earlier, I had already met someone far more dazzling. Faced with such an excellent prospect, I didn't even feel the need to pursue anything with Lucas. During that meal, I made my lack of interest clear, but Lucas didn't back down. He said he would wait, hoping that one day I might develop feelings for him. And so, he waited for over a year. He was generous, considerate, gentle, and reliable. Sometimes, I thought being with him wouldn't be so bad, but I never felt the urge to fully commit, except for one time a month ago. My mother had a relapse of an old illness while I was on a business trip and couldn't return in time. Lucas drove to my house in the middle of the night and took her to the hospital just in time, preventing a worse outcome. That night, he stayed by the operating room without sleeping, sending me constant messages to reassure me. Falling in love is difficult, but feeling at ease in the moment is easy. I clearly remember arriving at the hospital early the next morning and agreeing to give our relationship a chance. Lucas was stunned for a few seconds before nodding in agreement, his eyes full of affection. However, I haven't forgotten how he knelt on one knee to put a ring on his first love's finger. The human heart is unpredictable. Whether it was a moment of confusion or a deliberate act, only he knows. Just like now, whether he genuinely regrets and wants to reconcile, or if he's using others to pressure me, or if he simply wants to sabotage my work, only he knows. There was a burst of laughter. A few scattered claps echoed in the conference room. I turned to see Grayson, his face full of mockery. Lucas's expression darkened visibly. Before he could react, Grayson spoke first. "Mr. Chi, your words are quite interesting. I was there that day and saw you kneeling on one knee, proposing to someone else. And now you say it was just a moment of confusion." Grayson smiled coldly. "You must have been very confused to say something so shameless." Lucas's face turned red. "What did you say?" I cut him off sharply. "We're all adults. We could have handled this with dignity, but you insisted on making it ugly. You want to know why I had to break up with you? I can tell you clearly, because I find it disgusting. My boyfriend proposing to his first love in front of me. That scene makes me sick every time I think of it." Lucas looked stunned. After a few seconds, he suddenly turned his fierce gaze to Grayson. "And what about you? Don't think I don't know about those videos on your computer. They all have her in them." I found it amusing that I once genuinely believed we could be partners, that we could rely on each other. Seeing me smile, Lucas began frantically trying to explain. "I didn't access your computer. I merely stumbled upon the videos while you were watching them. It was unintentional, Lucas." I shook my head as if I hadn't let you view them. "How could it have been by chance?" I declared, "I'll state this once. I have no regrets about our relationship, but I'm ending things because you made a crucial error. I can't act like nothing occurred." Lucas went quiet. I gestured for my assistant to escort him out. The farce was finally over. As I looked up, Grayson was watching me closely. I chose to ignore him. After swiftly concluding the meeting, I made my way to the restroom. My heart raced, not with joy, but with frustration over the tumultuous situation. I had believed that feelings would naturally fade over time, but now they were like rampant weeds igniting swiftly, forcing me to remember what those emotions felt like when they first emerged. Back then, I had just started university, full of relentless energy. The various student council leaders were eager to give me tasks. Today it was moving this, tomorrow lifting that. I didn't mind much, but Grayson began to feel sorry for me, especially when I once tripped down some stairs, scraping my arms and legs on the gravel, leaving them bruised and bloodied. I bought some iodine to clean the wounds myself. After quickly tending to my injuries, I returned to organizing for the event. I didn't think it was a big deal. However, Grayson was upset when he saw it, though he couldn't change my indifferent attitude. He crouched in front of me, frowning as he applied the ointment. He carefully advised me, "You're a woman. You don't need to be so tough. If it hurts, just say so. Who wouldn't help you?" He gazed up at me, his eyes reflecting my entire being. "You can show vulnerability, at least with me. Do you understand?" Amidst the myriad voices and footsteps around, all I could hear was the loud beating of my heart. Now, I calmly adjusted my hair and makeup in the mirror. After exiting the restroom, I noticed Grayson leaning against the wall. Hearing my footsteps, he looked up, his expression neutral. For a moment, I was speechless, thinking he might mock me again. "Grayson, Before I could finish, he stood up and walked over in 2 strides. He extended his long arms and enveloped me in a firm hug. "Francesca." His slightly warmer body temperature surrounded me, triggering a memory. When I had ended things with Grayson years ago, he hadn't accepted it. Unsure of how to handle it, he could only hold me tightly, as if that would prevent me from leaving. I had resisted against his waist with all my might, uttering harsh words, but tears kept streaming down, soaking his shoulder. Since that embrace, the space between us had awkwardly remained around a meter apart. I didn't know what he intended to say. After calling my name, Grayson paused. For a moment, the hallway was silent, except for our hearts beating. What was happening? I quickly pushed him away. "Grayson, are you still?" A sudden urgent ringtone interrupted me. Grayson stared at me for a long moment before retrieving his phone. I saw the caller ID. It was the same girl from that night. I felt somewhat powerless. I turned away from Grayson. "You should take your call first." But Grayson ignored my suggestion. Disregarding the still ringing phone, he grabbed my wrist, forcing me to face him. "Francesca, what were you about to say?" I shook my head, attempting to free my hand. Grayson wouldn't release his grip, his eyes fixed on mine. As the ringtone finally stopped, he softly asked, "Sophia, what were you going to ask me?" That name, Sophia, felt completely out of place. I wanted to ask him if he still had feelings for me. I wanted to inquire if he knew what he was doing. I also wanted to tell him that everything had long ended. But the ringtone began again, and all my words were stuck, unable to form. Grayson seemed to get it, though I believe he misunderstood my intent. He kept one hand firmly holding me, preventing my departure, and used the other to answer the call, switching it to speaker mode. "Say whatever you need to. If it's not important, don't bother me." "Wait, why are you snapping at me?" "I was just calling to inform you that the task you asked me to handle a few days ago has been completed." Before the caller could finish, Grayson interrupted. "Did you hear that? This is my sister." Grayson looked at me, his grip tightening unconsciously, but his tone was almost soothing. "So, Sophia, what were you going to tell me?" I glanced down at his hand and forcefully pulled it away. "How come I didn't know you had a sister? And besides, what does that have to do with me? Sis-in-law. Please don't get the wrong idea. I'm truly Grayson's cousin. Don't let this lead to any misunderstanding, or else my older brother will definitely retaliate." Grayson ended the call. He looked at me, his eyes growing deeper. How could it not be related? I have other siblings too. If you want to know, I'll explain everything. Would that be okay? Grayson's call came just as I was about to drift off to sleep, already in my pajamas. Over and over, I thought I should clarify things once more, making everything absolutely clear. Just as the ringtone was about to stop, I answered the call. But it wasn't Grayson's voice on the line. "Hello? Hello, sorry to bother you so late, but your husband fell asleep at our bar after drinking too much. Could you come pick him up?" My husband? Yes, your husband's primary contact is you. The name he saved you under is quite unique, something like eternal love. That night in the hallway, Grayson had stared at me motionlessly, his eyes showing struggle and sorrow. He asked, "Would that be okay?" I declined. Grayson was taken aback, and hurriedly left that night. Before departing, he looked at me with eyes full of disappointment and frustration. At the time, I didn't understand. I thought he was merely upset with me. It wasn't until now, standing at the bar just a step away from his booth, that I realized. He was angry because he believed I had moved on. She really liked Lucas. What's so great about him? She's with him, but she still has someone else in her heart. If I hadn't tipped her off, she'd still be deceived. Grayson's voice was slurred, but I could still piece together what had transpired. That day, Lucas had informed me he was on a business trip, and I hadn't suspected anything. Then someone added me as a friend and sent me photos of him and Fernanda at various locations, which led me to follow them. The person sitting next to Grayson interjected, "I'm just saying, if she's fallen for someone else, maybe it's time for you to move on too. What exactly are you so hung up on her?" Grayson didn't respond. He lifted his glass and took a deep gulp. Then he reached out, draping his arm over the person's shoulder. With his other hand, he raised a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. I heard his voice, intoxicated yet clear. "Don't talk about her! You're not allowed to speak ill of her!" Grayson lowered his head, heavily slumping over the table, his voice soft. "I can't help it. I've only ever liked her for so many years. I just regret it. Regret not being braver back then, not being more decisive. Would everything have been different? I couldn't provide her with a sense of security. I was useless. I was completely paralyzed. Even though I only needed to take one more step to reach her, my legs felt like they were filled with lead, unable to move forward. Grayson's love was too burdensome, carrying the weight of 6 years of unspoken feelings, crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I couldn't move. Sigh. After all, the boy who once had eyes only for me hadn't changed much. For 6 long years, pure affection endured, a testament to patience that would move anyone. My reverie was interrupted only when my phone buzzed, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from Shen's mother. "Fran, please respond to Auntie's message from when Grayson and I reunited." Shen's mother had sent 2 texts. "Did he search for you, Fran? You're wonderful. Auntie knows you're great, but he might have better choices." Despising complications, I chose to flee once more. The instant Grayson glanced my way, panic seized me. In the distance, I heard the clatter of glass and chairs crashing. Hastily, I signaled for a cab. It wasn't until I was safely in the car that I dared to glance back. Grayson stood alone on the sidewalk, his expression empty as I drove away, my chest tightening and my shirt crumpling from my grip. I avoided looking in the rearview mirror again. The car halted at my building's entrance. Exhausted, I dragged myself inside. Stepping out of the elevator, I unexpectedly encountered Lucas crouched by my door. Upon recognizing me, he sprang to his feet and hurried over, catching me off guard as he embraced me tightly. His strong hold made me frown. "Lucas, let go! Fran, I was wrong. Please don't leave me," he pleaded. "Okay, I understand. I've already resolved things with her. It won't happen again." His voice wavered as he clung to me, almost incoherent. "It's all my fault. I don't know what came over me. I worked so hard to earn your trust, yet I still made that mistake." I let out a small, uncertain laugh, unsure if it was mocking or something else. Lucas tightened his grip further. I frowned and tried to push him away, placing my hands on his shoulders. "Our relationship. You knew it was because we were meant to be." Lucas's body suddenly went rigid. He held me, clearly confused. "Fran, what? What do you mean?" "I'm sorry, Lucas, but I never loved you from the start." "Stop!" Lucas interrupted, his grip tightening as if he wanted to fuse with me. "Please stop talking, Fran," he implored. I remained silent, complying with his request. For a brief moment, the hallway was filled only with our breathing, a fleeting sense of peace, until Grayson arrived. The sight struck him deeply, and he swung a punch at Lucas's face. Lucas had no choice but to release his hold. Grayson seized the opportunity, pulling me to his side with a fierce glare at Lucas. When Lucas reached out to grab me again, I instinctively pulled away. His hand hovered for a few seconds before he slowly retracted it, realizing something as he let out a self-deprecating laugh. "I get it now." With those words, Lucas turned and headed toward the elevator. The doors closed swiftly, and he disappeared. Grayson then focused his attention on me, reaching into my bag to retrieve my keys. He unlocked the door, pulling me inside and pressing me against the wall with rough urgency, yet his hands supported my head and back. "Grayson, you really care for him that much? You'd let him do anything to you?" he shouted, his face flushed and eyes shimmering with an unclear emotion, perhaps from tears or alcohol. I lifted my hand to wipe away whatever it was, but he grabbed my wrist firmly. "What are you going to do? Push me away again?" "He can hold you, but I can't, Francesca. Answer me. Besides holding you, what else did you let him do?" Before I could respond, Grayson forcefully grabbed my chin, the pressure making me wince. He didn't relent. "Francesca!" His eyes were filled with despair and hurt as he finally spoke. "Why won't you answer?" For a moment, I was lost for words. Memories from 6 years ago flashed through my mind. The pure, bright-eyed boy he once was, now a mature, tall man who still looked only at me. I fell silent, but Grayson seemed to grasp my thoughts, letting out a bitter laugh. "I'm still not enough, am I?" With that, he slammed the door and left. The loud noise was followed by complete silence. The quiet was so intense I could hear neighbors chatting in their apartments, and a wave of sadness washed over me. For him. I stood there for a long time, unable to endure the pain, and finally opened the door to see him one last time. But the hallway was empty. He won't return this time, I thought. Maybe that's for the best, a fresh start. I leaned against the door and slowly sank to the floor, burying my head in my arms. My sadness extended beyond him to Francesca. Suddenly, I heard my name. I froze. "Franny, look up." The only people who called me Franny were my mom and Grayson. Slowly, I lifted my head to see Grayson standing before me once more. His eyes were red, a mix of helplessness and tenderness. He extended his hand to me. With trembling fingers, I took his and stood up. "Grayson, Franny," I murmured. His eyes sparkled with determination. "I don't care about anything else. I just want to ask you one thing. Do you really have no feelings for me anymore? Not even a little?" Tears welled up in my eyes. How could I resist such unwavering resolve? After a moment, I closed my eyes and squeezed his hand back. Grayson leaned closer, resting his forehead against mine. He whispered, "All I want is for you to like me, even just a little." My rational mind shattered entirely. Everything around me blurred. Without saying a word, I lifted my head and kissed him. Grayson was momentarily taken aback, but quickly responded, pressing my lips open with force and determination. His breath was warm and intense, making me feel my reason dissipate along with his kiss. As his sweat trickled down my neck, I closed my eyes and held him tightly, the man he had become and the boy he was 6 years ago. I slept well through the night. When I awoke, the room was dim, with only a few rays of light seeping through the curtain gaps. Grayson sat in those beams, gazing at me gently. "Grayson!" I reached out and entwined my fingers with his. His expression shifted slightly as he grasped my hand more firmly. Our palms pressed together before a shadow fell over me, followed by Grayson's lips. He cupped my face with one hand, his fingers threading through my hair as he kissed me deeply. I whimpered softly, wrapping my arms around his neck in response. My lips were enveloped in his scent for what felt like an eternity. He eventually released me, his nose brushing against mine, sending a cool sensation through my fingers. I glanced down to see that Grayson had slipped a silver ring onto my finger. Looking back up, his voice was husky as he whispered, "Francesca, I want to hold on to you." I intertwined our fingers, but remained silent. From that day forward, Grayson and I reconciled. When my mom discovered our reunion, she remained silent initially, but her eyes soon reddened. I took her rough hand in mine, assuring her that I would protect myself and avoid getting hurt. After work, Shen's mother hurried to see me. Typically poised and impeccably dressed, her hair was now disheveled, and she appeared visibly upset. I messaged Grayson, asking him to pick me up later, and after he replied, I turned off my phone. Approaching Mrs. Shen, I heard her say, "You finally decided to see me." Her disapproving gaze met mine. If I hadn't come, would I just let you ruin everything? Stirring my coffee slowly, I responded, "What do you mean by ruining things, Auntie? I don't recall owing you anything." Mrs. Shen gave me a sharp look, her jaw clenched. "Francesca, I thought you were a sensible girl. Have you forgotten the promise you made to me back then? Why are you still dragging Grayson down with you?" I curled my lips into a faint smile. "Don't joke, Auntie. I broke up with him back then, and it wasn't because of anything you did." Mrs. Shen fell silent, her demeanor changing instantly. "Don't attempt to manipulate me. I've mentioned it before. You're not the ideal match for Gray." She frowned, adopting her typical instructive tone. "Fran, I'm considering what's best for both of you. You're young and might not realize that marriage involves more than just love. How many marriages worldwide truly endure with love remaining? You might label me selfish or accuse me of trying to separate you, but everything I do stems from a mother's love. You care for him. Don't you want him to have the best possible future? A compatible match is something you can't overlook, no matter your circumstances." Her cutting remarks echoed in my mind, making me feel the weight of her concerns. But Mom, have you ever considered that Franny and I might also build a wonderful future together? I made a mistake once, and I won't repeat it." At that moment, Grayson appeared beside me. He stood quietly, protecting me from Mrs. Shen's criticisms and disapproval. Mrs. Shen was taken aback, her chest rising and falling as her face paled with fury. "Fine, fine. My son has grown up and no longer listens to me." Grayson remained composed, holding my hand as he addressed his mother casually. "I'll heed the advice I need to. But for everything else, I hope you'll support my wishes." After Mrs. Shen left, Grayson drove me home. The car smoothly pulled up outside my building. As I began to unbuckle my seatbelt, Grayson suddenly reached out and held me back. "Francesca, what's wrong?" he asked, rolling up the windows. The soft light inside the car highlighted the strands of his hair, and Grayson looked at me, his Adam's apple gently moving. "Will you trust me this time? Be certain. I won't let you go again." I didn't reply, but placed my hand over his, our palms touching. He looked down, his long lashes casting deep shadows beneath his eyes. I lifted my hand to gently touch his face. "What are you afraid of? That I'll run away again?" Grayson's lashes quivered. He covered my hand with his, pressing his cheek against my palm. "I'm terrified." Hearing that made me smile. Looking at the cautious man before me, his eyes filled solely with me, I nodded. "All right." I curled my fingers and softly scratched his palm, smiling as I agreed. Grayson couldn't shake the feeling that he was truly awful. His jealousy towards Lucas was overwhelming. He watched Lucas's every move scrupulously. When he accidentally found out Lucas was seeing someone else, Grayson's initial reaction was joy, quickly followed by rage. How could Lucas betray her? How could he let her down? Enraged, Grayson plotted with his cousin to trap Lucas using blatant and crude methods to expose his true nature. He wanted her to witness Lucas's flaws firsthand, then make his own appearance casually. He had rehearsed this countless times in his mind, convinced he could once again be by her side. He didn't want to be angry with her, but seeing her so hurt was unbearable. Grayson pressed his lips together, fearing to consider whether she truly liked Lucas. His jealousy was driving him mad. During the 6 years he was away, she had lived well and had someone else by her side. Why? Why was he the only one who remained unchanged? He was furious with himself for being so weak 6 years ago and for taking so long to prepare. 6 years. People often say that youthful feelings fade over time, but not for Grayson. He had practiced repeatedly. These 6 years were spent removing every obstacle, all for a single chance to return to her side. Over 2,000 days and nights, he feared being just a step too late. Grayson had known for a long time that he was deeply invested. It had been clear to him from many years ago, from the very first time they met. It was a sunny day, the sun high in the sky. The school's roller skating club members were practicing in the square. As Grayson walked by, he paused to watch and saw a girl fall to the ground with a thud, landing just a step away from him. Startled, Grayson hurried to help her up, but the girl waved him off with a smile and said, "Sorry about that. I didn't mean to scare you." Grayson was momentarily stunned. As he processed her words, she had already stood up, moving so smoothly that it surprised him. Then, he felt a pang of heartache. Grayson had always been someone who followed his emotions. He instantly recognized his feelings. Even back then, he liked her. He admired her brightness, her resilience, and the way she smiled at him in that moment. Grayson thought, it's okay. If she runs, he'll just keep chasing. All he had ever wanted from the beginning was her. Fortunately, he had caught her.